Lesson, we will read an excerpt from The Last Wild Place, and you can find the reading along with the questions that will follow in the video description. And remember, when we're reading an excerpt, that it is a piece of a longer text, and this will be a text for middle school readers. During those first 2 weeks after Luther stopped being his friend, Chip dreaded going to school. The only hour of his day that was bearable was science class. Chip used to think of science class as a bunch of boring words in a textbook. But Mr. Odell had changed all that. And kind of by accident, Chip had become one of Mr. Odell's favorite students. It started when Mr. Odell announced how students could get a good grade in his class. Not by memorizing a lot of facts, but by thinking. The students stared at him, either wondering what he was talking about, or else marveling at the fringe of reddish-brown hair surrounding his shiny bald head. Mr. Odell had answered by asking another question. What common substance can take the form of a liquid, a solid, or a gas? Nobody answered. The class just sat there waiting for Mr. Odell to explain what that had to do with anything. Then Chip got it. Mr. Odell meant that he was likely to throw out questions about things that weren't in the book and expect students to figure out the answers up for themselves. To Chip, the question seemed more like a riddle. The first liquid Chip thought of was water, and then he thought of ice. Ice is a solid, and when water gets super hot, it turns into steam. He wasn't sure if steam was a gas or not, but when nobody else spoke up, Chip blurted out, "Water?" After that, Chip could tell that Mr. Odell liked him. Chip liked him too, at least most of the time. In English, social studies, or math, Mr. Odell was just an average teacher. But the minute the lesson turned to science, Mr. Odell practically exploded with energy and enthusiasm. The best part about science class was the field trips. The principal usually allowed outdoor field trips only once or twice a semester, but Mr. Odell had special permission to take his class once a month to a big vacant lot down the street to study biology in the field. Kate had told Chip that Mr. Odell had once taught in college and had written a book on field biology. She figured that was the reason he got special privileges. Chip quickly discovered that what Mr. Odell called field biology was what he had been doing all his life, paying attention to other living things. Chip had favorites, ducks and turtles, for example, and lightning bugs, but Mr. Odell seemed to be interested in every living creature. Once when a student pointed out an anthill, Mr. Odell put his nose down so close to watch that Chip expected an ant to climb right into it and march up through the freckles to stare back at him through his golden-rimmed glasses. Another time, Mr. Odell had the whole class sit cross-legged in a circle to watch a chameleon change from brown to bright green. While they waited still and quiet, they got to see it let down a flap of bright red skin under its chin to attract insects. Anyone who wasn't paying close attention missed the most important moment when the lizard flicked out its long tongue and whisked a fly back into its mouth. Mr. Odell had said that students take detailed notes on each animal or insect they were observing. He also encouraged them to make sketches of what they saw. The trips with Mr. Odell had taught Chip a different way of looking at things. Out where Chip lived, there wasn't a whole lot of wildlife in plowed fields, which were heavily pesticided. Pesticides is a chemical that you put on plants to make it so bugs don't live. A side would mean death, and pests means bugs. But quite a few interesting creatures still lived in the drainage ditches and the high grass along the banks. When Luther first came to live with his grandparents, Chip had showed him where to find the birds' nests built so low to the ground that you could look right in and watch the eggs hatch. He'd also taught Luther, a boy raised in New York City who knew nothing about Florida wildlife, how to tell the difference between slow land turtles and snapping turtles. For one thing, if you didn't catch a snapping turtle just right, it could give you a bite that really hurt. Mr. Odell never talked about an animal's feelings, but about its purpose and why it ought to be right where it was, doing whatever it was doing. Like the day Luther got mad at Chip when Chip brought a blue skink to class. Mr. Odell was excited as if it was a baby dinosaur. In about 5 minutes, he had everybody in the class involved in trying to find out more about skinks. But when the class ended, he'd call Chip up to his desk and said, "Now you'll take the skink back and put it right where you found it, won't you?" Mr. Odell looked at the skink, then at Chip. If somebody put you in a car and drove you far away and dumped you out, would that be okay with you? Probably not, Chip admitted. I'd want to go home. Most critters do, Mr. Odell pointed out. Things do happen that displace us from our homes. Humans are pretty good at adapting to our new locations, but even for them it's stressful. And some creatures can't imagine it at all. If you take them out of their natural environment, they just die. Chip took the skink back to the drainage ditch where he'd found it and let it go. All right, and this would be what a skink is. It is a lizard, basically a cross between a lizard and a snake, I might say, because it's like a snake body, but then if you look, it has two little legs. So this would have been a skink. Now, with this story, something that we might find confusing is Chip's conflict. So Chip clearly has his friend named Luther, who he had a falling out with, because he also briefly mentions Luther in the beginning. So we could say Chip's conflict is he is having some type of conflict argument with his friend. And then we find out more about his friend. Not much more, but we learn that his friend had come to live in Florida. So we could maybe start to make this comparison that the skink is supposed to symbolize Luther, because a symbol would be something that represents something else. So there could have been deeper meaning with Mr. Odell talking about the skink, and maybe Mr. Odell was trying to give Chip some life advice on his friend, that whatever their argument was, maybe Chip should give his friend some leeway or kind of like a second chance, because it is very difficult to adjust to a new life in a new state. Really, anywhere where you're separated from your original home, going to another one can be a tricky time in young people's life and adults' lives as well. So we might assume that something had happened here, and the skink is supposed to symbolize Luther in some way. After the text, you will find our multiple choice questions. So if you would like to pause our video and take some time to answer the questions and then play it when you are finished. All right, so our first question. How does Chip change as a result of the way Mr. Odell teaches? He improves his memory, he becomes confused, he develops enthusiasm, he loses confidence. Now, if we go back here, he did tell us some things. He's saying that science is the most bearable class, which I wouldn't really call that a favorite class. You just hate it the least, you might say. But then we find out that he really appreciates Mr. Odell's excitement, because if the words are boring, but Mr. Odell changes it, we could say that has to do with excitement or enthusiasm. So we know that he's not confused because here he answers the question, right? He was the only one that even tried to answer, which does show his memory might be improving, but he didn't remember that fact. It just kind of came to him with Mr. Odell's question or riddle. So for this one, it would be he's developing enthusiasm or excitement for learning. And then we have a sentence from paragraph 8. Once when a student pointed out an anthill, Mr. Odell put his nose down so close to watch that Chip expected an ant to climb right onto it and march up through his freckles to stare back at him through his gold-rimmed glasses. This is about tone. So tone and mood are very similar. Tone would be the feeling that the reader wants to convey or give to the readers, or the author wants to convey. So for this, it is a little curious, right? Because they're looking at this anthill. I wouldn't say it's anxious. Anxious would mean nervous, anxietized, right? So that wouldn't be anxious, stressed, nervous. Observant, they are observing nature. But in this case, would an ant really crawl up someone's nose and stare back at them? I mean, maybe, but it could look like that, right? But this is an attempt to be funny. humorous. So this is supposed to be a funny tone here, but you probably didn't laugh because it's not really that funny of a joke. But that sometimes identifying humor in a story when the author's trying to be funny, but you might not think it's funny, that can be hard. But this was supposed to be a little joke here that he thinks the ant's going to climb up his teacher's nose. So this has to be a humorous tone because that's a silly idea. How do the details about Mr. Odell in paragraph 11 support a central idea to the story? So the central idea of the story, obviously, there can be many central ideas. You have a teacher that inspires a student. That right there is a central idea. Teachers can be inspiring when they are enthusiastic about the subject they're teaching. But for this particular one, this is where 11. Mr. Odell never taught about an animal's feelings, but its purpose, why it ought to be right where it was, doing what it's doing. Like when he got, the day after, Luther got mad at Chip when Chip brought a blue skink to class. I don't know why that would have made Luther mad. Mr. Odell was excited. In about 5 minutes, he told everybody in trying to find out more about skinks. But then he said he has to take it back to where he found it. They show his fascination with blue skinks. It does seem like the teacher was fascinated with skinks, but let's see if there's something better. They show his appreciation for living animals. He does appreciate animals. They show his excitement about baby dinosaurs. No, because a skink is not a dinosaur, so it can't be C. They show his passion for reading animals' feelings. Now, he does seem passionate about animals, right? But specifically at the start of this paragraph, we know that Mr. Odell doesn't talk about the animals' feelings. He just talks about where they should be and what their purpose is. So, the question has to be Mr. Odell's appreciation for animals. And if we're going to say a central idea of the story, you could say animals are students and teachers alike both enjoy learning about animals, or animals are animals are part of, well, it really is part of this curriculum, right? So you could say appreciating animals is something that good teachers are able to pass on to their learners, something along these lines. All right, and then for number 4, a synonym for the word displaced as it is used in paragraph 14. So if we go to our paragraph 14, most critters do. Things happen that displace us from our homes. Humans are pretty good at adapting to new locations, but even for them it's stressful. And some creatures can't manage it all. If you take them out of their natural environment, they just die. That's not good, but if we say displace, guard, no, return, it's talking about the opposite of returning. It could be change, but when we go, it's going to specifically say things happen that remove us from our home. So if you're displaced from your home, you would have been removed from it for whatever reason. So displaced has to do with people moving. In the story, removing, we could say, for 4. In this story, how does the author develop Chip's point of view of Mr. Odell? Now, point of view is just whose thoughts and feelings do we see in the story. So this story is written in third person. So we have an unknown narrator talking to us about Chip. But we do know Chip's thoughts and feelings. So Chip is the only character whose thoughts and feelings we know. By mentioning that Chip is one of Mr. Odell's favorite students. By showing Chip answering a tough question that Mr. Odell asks. By explaining why Mr. Odell has special field privileges. By describing events that make an impression on Chip. Now, we do know that Chip thinks he's one of Mr. Odell's favorite students. So that could be. He did ask this tough question, or answer the tough question. But then I might also say that all these events is what makes this impression on Chip, right? Because you could sort of say that B is kind of already involved in answer choice D. So B includes D, because all the events is what made this impression. This one, it would have to be D, because it's the culmination of all the events that built our point of view of Mr. Odell. How Mr. Odell handled the skink situation, how Mr. Odell asked the tough question, this one, it really wasn't much of it. That was just a little brief part, right? But A and B could have been viable answer choices, but luckily D includes A and B. It was describing all these events that impressed Chip. How do Chip's exploration in the outdoors influence him? They lead to his initial interest in a variety of local animals. They make it difficult for him to understand Luther's point of view. They prompt him to discover wildlife in plowed fields. They enable him to show Luther how to handle a skink. It really can't be D, because they didn't talk about Luther and the skink. He specifically mentioned how he didn't have much wildlife in his plowed fields yard. They make it difficult for him to understand Luther's point of view. I would almost say the opposite. It appeared that Mr. Odell was almost using the skinks as a way to get Chip to see Luther's point of view, that maybe Luther was having this hard time having moved from New York to Florida. So we could say it leads him initial interest in, let's look. Our answer here, the trips with Mr. Odell taught Chip a different way of looking at things. So here we have Chip showed him where to find the bird's nest. It does seem like Chip was a little bit into animals before this Mr. Odell class, but it appears that he definitely took a more note of their local animals. So for this one, it really has to be A. They led to his initial interest in a variety of local animals. So Chip's exploration in the outdoors influenced him by taking an interest in animals, because Chip is also outside a lot, even before Mr. Odell, because he knew about the turtles, he knew about the birds and whatnot. So Chip is interested in the local animals. A. Which detail would be most important to include in the summary? Now, we would want to say, which of these would not make sense? If we took one of these out, would the story still make sense? Mr. Odell treats students differently based on their interests. We wouldn't really need to know that, right? And the story would still make sense. Mr. Odell teaches science better than he teaches other subjects. That is decently important, because this story is basically about science. It's not about math. It's not about English. It's only about the science stuff, right? Mr. Odell values the purpose and habitat of every animal. He does. And that is important, right? Mr. Odell previously taught in college and wrote a book. Now, that is important as well, because it shows that's why he gets to go do these field trips with the students all the time, right? In the field. I also want to focus on our protagonist, which was Chip, right? So if we look, it can't be A, we eliminate A. This one, if we didn't know that science was his best subject that he was teaching, that might not have really mattered, right? Because he could have still taught math really well and been doing the stuff with the science. And also with this one, we didn't exactly need to know that. It was important, but the story still would have made sense. But let's say we took out the part about how Mr. Odell values the purpose and habitat of every animal. That really would have changed the story, because if Mr. Odell didn't value the purpose and habitat of every animal, he wouldn't have had that talk with Chip at the end about returning the skink. So the return of the skink was very important to the story's message, because we do assume he's giving him some type of life advice with a skink metaphor for his friend Luther. So for this, it would have to be C. Because if Mr. Odell was someone who didn't value animals, then his science class wouldn't have been as fun. And the part about writing the book wouldn't have mattered. So the fact that he values animals so much is really what makes him the good science teacher. And it leads to our plot. It adds to the plot because that's the reason why Chip has to return the skink. So for this, it has to be C. Because if he wasn't someone who valued animals, the story would have been a lot different, right? So for this, it has to be C. And this was our multiple choice lesson on The Last Wild Place.